Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the Empire for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Making this video was not necessarily in my plans at the moment. The next video I actually wanted to make was, of course, the video talking about the races with the best generic lords and heroes in the game. Not legendary lords, that will come later at the future video, but just the races that have the best selection of regular lords and heroes in their campaigns. Not legendary heroes, not legendary lords. But a lot of people got, let's just say, pissed off over the fact that I didn't put the Empire on the artillery list, because they viewed our artillery of the Empire as being great. It isn't. It isn't for practical purposes. Units don't exist in isolation. They never do. They don't do it in a campaign. They don't do it in multiplayer. Cost is important in multiplayer because that determines how many of them you can bring on the battlefield. This is important, by the way, on the tabletop itself. The cost of a unit determines its usefulness. Now, I'm not going to talk about the cost of the Imperial artillery because it's obviously not necessarily a problem. But the situation in the Imperial campaign with artillery, as well as many other issues, do bring them down. Point of fact is, the Empire is just a bad race. In fact, it's one of the worst races in the game, minus the Demons of Chaos, especially the Demon Prince, Kugath, and Kairos. So what are the problems? Let's go over those issues when it comes to that. But let's focus on the artillery aspect. Here's the problem with Imperial artillery. The good artillery units, Hellstorms and Cannons, are only available at tier 4. Now, for some races, this wouldn't be an issue, because some races have the economy to support very high growth to get those buildings to tier 4, and they also have the growth inherently to get there. This is one situation that Cathay, for instance, has. Cathay doesn't even necessarily have the best economy in the world, but certainly a damn sight better than Empire between their convoys that they do have, as well as the faction-wide benefits they get from Harmony if you balance it out. A bit annoying, certainly, to balance it out, but it is very doable even from very early on in your campaign. The Dwarves, yeah, they have a lot of issues, but they get one of the most important artillery units in their roster, the Grudge Thrower, at tier 2, and any faction can get to tier 2 very, very quickly in their campaigns. And also having it at tier 2 is significant because it means you can build artillery building in any settlement, a minor settlement. One of the things you do in a Grombrindal campaign, for instance, is you start building that artillery shop from the very start of your campaign, giving you a significant amount of power. It's one of the reasons Grombrindal is actually the best legendary lord of the dwarves. But for the Empire, let's go over it. Let's go over their many issues in their campaign, because when it comes down to it, I don't care how people may perceive something. When something is broken, I'm going to talk about it. When something is good, I'm going to talk about it. The Empire is not good. It's pretty broken. It's got a lot of issues. All their legendary lords, to begin with, are broken in one way, shape, or form. Be it Balthazar Gelt and Karl Franz, because they have to deal with the bad Imperial authority system. How do you tackle Imperial authority, by the way, in an effective manner in a campaign? You exploit the game, not cheese it. No, you go on full exploit mode. You basically come over here in Nuln. You don't take Nuln, because that would cost you a lot of Imperial authority, but you do declare war on them. You take one of their settlements, you give it to Gelt or Averheim. Next turn, you get the event to force them to give it back. You do so, you start generating Imperial authority to the infinite level. And that's how you break the Imperial authority. Once you have enough of it, you take Nuln itself, and that's, by the way, how you get access, the fastest way to get access to these wonderful artillery units, because of the landmark that exists in Nuln. But that isn't good design. That doesn't mean it's a good race. So that's one of the problems with two of their legendary lords. What about Marcus Wolfhart? Hostility, plain and simple. Yes, he can get access to pretty much their entire roster very, very quickly in his campaign, but he's obviously going to have significant issues because of the hostility meter in his campaign. But he is actually the most powerful of the legendary lords of the Empire. Volkmar, you might say, oh yes, if you get all the Books of Nagash, or a significant portion of them, you do become ridiculously strong in your campaign. The problem is the Books of Nagash create a lot of issues in your campaign diplomatically, because let's say a book is in a settlement held by one of your allies. Enjoy dealing with that, because you actually have to take that settlement by force. That creates a huge number of issues when you are forced to do that. It's one of the problems the Tomb Kings have in their campaigns, it creates significant issues. Beyond the fact that Volkmar's early game is misery, to be quite honest. Actually, his starting position in general is quite miserable. Lots of power, though, of course, with him, but still issues. Issues in every campaign. And this does matter. If every campaign is badly designed, if every campaign has major issues, that's a black mark on a particular race, a particular faction. I actually hate using that word race. I think I'm just one community strike away from getting my channel shut down when I use that term when we're talking about the races of Warhammer 3. But anyway, that's one of the first problems. The second problem is that the Empire's growth and economy, while decent, isn't great. And it's certainly not good enough to support getting to these higher tiers very fast. Beyond the fact that a lot of Imperial units are also locked behind getting the armory. Especially the ones you need, the greatswords in particular, you will need to get an armory in order to use them. So problems there. Then also the fact their main economic building starts at 250, goes to 375, goes to 500. It's a decent economy, but it doesn't hold a candle to many other races in the game. Some people took issue with the fact that I rated Bretonnia pretty highly, but here's the thing, Bretonnia is extraordinary in a lot of ways. Their only major issues are the vows themselves, the limitations of that, the fact that their heroes also don't have necessarily special skill trees either, and of course their issues when dealing with sieges, but they have tools for that. And while Bretonnia may start out weak, they get very strong very quickly. They have one of the highest growths on their settlements in the entire game, and they have the economy to support that. Bretonnia also can gain a ridiculous amount of money from sacking settlements. Yes, it will cost you chivalry, but it's available. Plus 50% income from sacking settlements on certain lords if you level up the skill. It's considered a negative skill, but it's a huge benefit in your campaign if you're playing the Bretonnia. As the Empire, you don't have any of those luxuries, and while your melee line is better than Bretonnia, and your high-end artillery options are obviously significantly better than Bretonnia, you are going to be significantly limited in the campaign. The campaign systems are going to limit you, the starting positions of the lords are going to limit you, their many enemies that they're dealing with in the campaign is going to limit you. So limitation after limitation after limitation. Then we have to talk about the regular lords. The best one is actually the Archlector. The reason he's the best is not that he's some wonderful combat, not because he has some wonderful combat ability. He won't stand up to any hero or lord that has real combat potential, but they're pretty decent between the Grand Hammer, the damage resistance, and of course being able to get the Grand Soulfire. And being able to get these very, very quickly, by the way, over here. The regular lords, the generals of the Empire, not really that great. The Huntsman General, who do have special skill line, which is the only thing that makes them useful, struggle because right now Lords and Heroes hopefully change to 3.0, but we'll see about that. We'll see what Creative Assembly will do. We have no idea what kind of changes they're going to bring to the rest of the game, but the ranged Lords and Heroes do struggle to be effective in combat because they struggle to shoot. I've talked quite a bit about the ranged issues in this game, but let's say the worst ones are not the regular gunpowder units, it's the Lords and Heroes that are ranged that struggle. And this includes powerful legendary lords like Alif Anar and Oxiatl. So a significant issue when it comes to their regular lords. What about their heroes? Well, the warrior priests are decent, replenishment, the Grand Soulfire, and their battle wizards do give you good amount of magical choices. Imperial captains and witch hunters, though, not great. Witch hunters are basically there to debuff some enemies, don't really bring much else to the table. They just don't have the combat ability in their ranged hero, and Imperial captains are just plainly mediocre. You get them for training purposes and maybe as a distraction for your ranged units. So, lords, heroes, legendary lords, economy, growth, all limited. Campaign mechanics, either Imperial Authority or Volkmar's books, or Hostility for Marcus, limited. We go further, because this doesn't end. Then, their troops, their melee infantry, until you get to great swords, not good at all. They're not going to be able to stand up in a fight against many other units. You can't rely on them to win battles. Great swords are pretty decent, but they do require you to get to tier 3, and they're not extraordinarily good. It is a significant power increase when you do get them, but it's not necessarily enough. There are races that do have better melee units at tier 3 available in their rosters. Their ranged units, their archers, crossbowmen, and gunpowder units. Well, the gunpowder units are useless, struggle in a lot of situations, can do a decent amount of damage if we're talking about handgunners, but still significant issues, especially in sieges, but also a lot of field battles. What about archers? Decent enough, but too high upkeep. Basically, goblin archers are much more worth it. And fun fact is, in a greenskin campaign, goblin archers do beat the crap out of these guys, because goblin archers get a significant number of upgrades, be it for scrap, the research tree, or lord skills compared to these guys. What about crossbowmen? Decent enough on armor piercing damage, decent enough range, but there are much better ranged units throughout the game, even at tier 1. These guys are tier 2, and again, cost is a factor. You don't have unlimited money in an Imperial campaign. What about cavalry? Cavalry is actually the shining spot in the Imperial roster, because you get Imperial Knights that are pretty damn good. A bit costly, of course. You're going to struggle to maintain a lot of these, but cavalry is a support unit. That's how you use them. And Imperial Knights will certainly do the job as flankers. Pistolers are a decent enough skirmisher unit, though short range. And at tier 3, of course, you start getting Outriders and Outriders with grenade launchers. These guys are great, firing while moving, having elevation so they can actually use their guns. They won't be great in a siege, but then again, no gunpowder unit is great in a siege, but they will be great. A couple of these, one or two of these in any army can be good. Or the grenade launchers, of course, not being able to fire at elevation. And then much later on, if you absolutely need them in the late game, you do get demigryphs. Artillery, yeah, it's limited by the tier. Not having a unit of artillery that can break down walls early on in a campaign is a major problem, not just for the Empire, for other races as well. Many other races, but many other races have other ways of dealing with it. Though, bear in mind, the Empire certainly isn't alone in this respect when it comes to not having artillery early on in their campaign, but the fact they have to get all the way to tier 4 to have them creates a lot of problems. Ultimately, any campaign on legendary very hard difficulty, for which I make these videos on explicitly, any campaign is determined by what you're doing in the first 20-30 turns. What happens after that is not too important. And you're not gonna be able to get to tier 4 that quickly, even if you try. And if you try, you're sacrificing a lot to push that hard, that fast. Believe me, I know, because that's exactly what I've been doing for 10 hours straight, trying to get to tier 4 with a lot of races so I can get access to their entire hero roster for the purposes of a video. It isn't easy, even for races that have much better growth than the Empire in their campaigns. That is what really comes down to. Limitation after limitation after limitation, a weak infantry roster, a weak range roster, a good cavalry roster, a decent artillery roster, but locked behind high tiers. So what do I think needs to change, right? It's easy to criticize, but what about solutions? Well, Imperial Authority, I would honestly say, needs to take a hike or an overhaul. The Books of Nagash need to be changed. The hostility meter needs to be changed. It would be great if we could just find a way to remove the hostility meter from Marcus Wolfar, or have him not spawn an AI army in his campaign. With Imperial Authority, what mods have done actually is a good solution. Being able to use Prestige to get a lot of actions, defensive alliances, military alliances, because the problem with Imperial Authority, it severely limits your ability to actually defend the Empire, because you can't get those defensive alliances, you can't get those military alliances, so the AI factions of the Empire, when you're playing the Empire, are not going to handle things very well. They won't support each other, they won't help each other. Half the Empire might be burnt to the ground, but factions that do have the strength and power to do something about it won't. And you don't have any tool to get them to do anything. You can't use the military, the allegiance system, which is actually a great diplomatic system that Creative Assembly created for this game. You can't order them to do it, you can't take control of their armies, you can't engage in the politicking that you should. So that's the issue with Prestige system. What about their unit roster? Well, that's obviously very tricky, because you always have to consider when balancing in multiplayer. But I would say some of these units are certainly too costly when it comes to their upkeep. So maybe an upkeep reduction for some of these units would be very welcome. Maybe being able to get great swords earlier in your campaign would be better, or getting some buffs to some of these units to make them more effective. And maybe reducing the tier for the artillery units would help a great deal. If you could get Hellstorm rocket batteries and great cannons at tier 3 as opposed to tier 4 without having to take Nuln and building a landmark there, which breaks the game. Because let's say you take Nuln, that's 6 Imperial Authority. Like if you just literally march on Nuln, you're gonna lose what, 6, 4 or 6 Imperial Authority. You're dangerously close to you're pushing into the territory of civil war, and you're suffering a lot to be able to do so. That's why you need to exploit the game if you want to get access to that artillery. If you do so, it can work. But yeah, reducing the tier on great cannons, at least Hellstorms, that's a different discussion. But just giving great cannons at tier 3 would be wonderful. What about mortars? You know, mortars are great. Yeah, except that on any high difficulty, the AI is going to be pretty effective in dodging their shells. There are some state troopers that are great, but still. And the state troopers... The problem I have with the state troopers isn't that they're bad. They're not. They're great units. There's a lot of variety to have over there, but it's just dealing with this entire system of Imperial Authority that is the problem over there. Or dealing with the Books of Nagash system if you're playing as Volkmar, of course. So lots of issues when we're talking about the Empire. They do need a fix. They needed an overhaul a long time ago. They didn't really get one. I mean, the only real improvements that the Empire has gotten, the only major update that they got was, of course, with Marquis Wolfheart. But it wasn't really fixing the major issues that the Empire has, and it created a lot of other issues as well in their campaigns. In fact, I would dare say that I would actually vastly prefer to play with the pre-Imperial Authority system in my Imperial campaigns at the moment. It would certainly make things a lot better. So that's where I stand on the subject of the Empire. It is the most popular race in the setting by a lot. I'm sure if you did a poll on which is the most popular race in the Warhammer setting, the Empire would win with over 50% of the votes easily, hands down, for obvious reasons. They're the most relatable, because we do relate to fellow humans at the end of the day. They're the most relatable race, but Total War Warhammer 3 needs to do them in a much better way. If only they would do them as well as some mods have done, we would not be having this discussion, but they have not. There's mods like SFO. While I don't necessarily like SFO in a lot of ways, I think that it does a brilliant job in making the Empire actually playable and workable. That's my stance on it. Questine here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. It is always annoying when you criticize something that a lot of people like. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. There's going to be a lot of people that just come out there to hurl insults at you just to tell you're wrong. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how objective you are, how much effort you put into it, how hard you try to be as straightforward and honest as possible to analyze things. None of that matters. That's just the world of YouTube.